Thanks so much. Wisconsin Supreme Court siding with the state attorney general in a power struggle over who decides how to spend legal settlement money. In a 5-2 decision, justices said Attorney General Kaul is following state law when he puts settlement dollars into the general fund and then directs some of that money to specific programs. Republican lawmakers had tried to tighten control starting in 2018, requiring Kaul to get approval from the legislature's Joint Finance Committee and capping how much money he could spend. The court left one key issue unresolved: whether some of those settlement dollars can be treated as proceeds from services by the Justice Department or other agencies. City Clerk